constitute fidelity. The number of students served, the time at which we serve them, the number of days, and most importantly, progress, the effectiveness of progress monitoring. We've identified all 4 of those as a focus for this year in order to continue the growth that we're seeing in the model. We're going to achieve this through a job-embedded professional learning model using the district literacy intervention teachers to go to campuses with our literacy intervention teachers, model the best practices with the program, and also engage literacy teachers on guided observations for those teachers who are showing the strongest amount of growth. We're tracking data now monthly for each literacy intervention teacher on each student, and that monthly data review is giving us an opportunity to identify where support is needed within the intervention weeks instead of waiting until after the intervention to identify where we need to support. Overall, we know that as fidelity increases, the rate of student growth increases. So our focus with our internal review was to acknowledge the strengths that we're serving more students and we are growing students, and then to identify ways that we can do a better job of what we're doing. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of data related to the leveled literacy intervention in Soluciones. On this chart, what you see is students meeting EOY end-of-year grade level reading expectations. And it is very important to note that the blue bar references a different data set than the other bars. In 2016-17, Fort Bend ISD was still using the Diagnostic Reading Assessment, or DRA, to assess students meeting EOY grade level expectations. That assessment, while strong, was administered by the 1,200 to 1,500 individual teachers and scored by those teachers. So the blue bar represents data from the DRA. What you see in the orange and green bars are years 2017-18 and 2018-19. And what you notice in first grade through fifth grade is an increase in the percentage of students demonstrating that they meet EOY grade level reading expectations. And so that's here in the orange to the green. I want to draw your attention to kindergarten. So our work at the ELC has really highlighted the importance of identifying when kindergartners reach the probable reader status. So we made the decision, even though the graph doesn't look great, to change our data metric here to the percent of students receiving a Tier 3 intervention. And so these are our students in kindergarten who are identified with the weakest skills, who have progressed from being at the lower end of the continuum to achieving end-of-year gains. And we think it's important, you'll see in the metrics and milestones that Audra and Alice referenced, to track probable reader at the end of kinder for all of our students so that we can see how we're growing our readers and closing gaps. This graph shows the student growth. And so we look at, using the Renaissance 360 data, we look at the percent of students that meet approximately a year's growth. What you see in our first through fifth graders is these students in LLI Soluciones are growing at the same rate as their grade level peers who did not need an intervention. In kindergarten, you see a slight reduction in the percent of students that grow, but it is important to note that kindergartners only engage in the intervention for a semester, while all other grade levels engage in the intervention for an entire year. At this time, I want to turn the presentation over to Venitra Senegal, the instructional officer at the ELC, to highlight some of the programming there.
Good evening and welcome to this part of the presentation. I hope that it goes well, and I hope that the data that you see and what we present is very brightening and eye-opening to you. The Early Literacy Center was constructed, as you know, as a new campus on last year, and our students, our teachers actually developed our vision, which is to grow our readers into leaders beyond what they can imagine, and we have a little movement that go with that our boys and girls embody every day for announcements. We do that through the community outreach, the relationships that we build with our staff, the relationships that we build with our students, and really importantly that we build with our community. Our parents love the Learning Center. They love coming. They love being a part of the learning that takes place at the center. And we invite them to all of the events that we have each month. So our mission statement really aligns with our goals of what we try to do here at this center, which is to really work with our parents and help them to learn how their kids are learning, bringing them to be a part of that learning in the classroom. as often as we can. So on this school year, our numbers have grown, and it's an amazing opportunity for more kids to show growth. So in our first grade classrooms, we currently have 97 students. We have 7 of those students are opt-in to first grade from other campuses within the district. From other campuses within our feeder pattern. And then we have 145 students that are, most of our students came from pre-K. They opted in to stay in the program for the kindergarten program, and so that gave us 145 students there. For FullDay PreK, we have 182 students as a part of that program. In the Early Intervention Academy, we have 72 students. And with our Baker Ripley program, we have infants to 3-year-olds, and we have 96 students as a part of that program. So what we love most about the Early Literacy Center is having our parents a part of that learning. So one of our biggest events we had in the spring semester was Learning Literacy with My Child Day. So the parents, what they did, they came in, they met in the classroom during the literacy instructional time, and either they were at block stations working with the blocks and the kids were teaching their parents how they construct and build and the purposes behind that, or the parents were reading to their kids or the kids were reading to their parents across the pre-K, kinder, and first grade classrooms. We had huge turnout in almost all of our events for this year, one being our STEM night, where we had about 160 parents to come out and bring their kids so that they can actually have more enrichment in STEM and show their understanding of different types of exploratory learning. And of course, our middle of the year, we had a winter sing-along and reading with Santa night, where our kids were able to actually present some theatrical poems to their parents and also sing just winter sing-along songs to their parents. And we had over 235 parents to participate. So overall, this past school year, we've had over 1,673 opportunities where parents have come in and actually been a part of the learning, a part of the reading, and a part of the growing with their kids. This year, we're continuing those efforts. We've already had 100 parents to come for our teddy bear picnic this school year. And our parents, the feedback I got as parents walked out the door to go and get books for their kids was, this is one of the most amazing opportunities for me. Thank you so much for offering this experience for me and my family. So those are things that we really work very hard to do at our center, is to welcome our community, get them involved, and get them to learn, to love learning with their children. Now I'll hand it over to Stephanie Williams.
Thank you, Venitra. So we're going to take a look at the data that evidences the work that Venitra and her team have done this year. So we're going to start with pre-K data, looking at phonological awareness. And what I want you to see are these last 2 columns. I'm going to see if this will work. If you look at these last 2 columns right here, you can look at the spring end of year for the ELC as compared to the district end of year. And what you'll notice is that the students in kindergarten, both for monolingual and bilingual, have progressed beyond grade level for their grade level peers across Fort Bend ISD. Likewise, when you look at mathematics, you'll see in those same 2 columns that the students at the ELC have met or exceeded their grade level peers' performance in pre-K. Now we're going to look at the kindergarten and first grade data, and the first set of columns is what we talked about a few minutes ago on probable reader. So what's important is to look at the percent of students that were at probable reader when they started the year versus the percent of students at probable reader when we ended the year. And then the really important data is over here when we look at student growth percentile. You'll say in kindergarten monolingual, 84% of students met adequate growth and 83% of first grade students met adequate growth. And I'm really proud to tell you that those percentages are the highest percentages in Fort Bend ISD for the number of students or percent of students who met adequate growth. And the last data that I'll show you compares the ELC probable reader across the district at the end of the year to the feeder pattern to where they are. And what you'll see is that the ELC is very close to or beyond, and we're really looking at kinder as when they should achieve probable reader. What this day, I think it was March of 2018 when we stood at one of these listening tours and presented the idea of the ELC. What you've seen here today is that the data evidences the work of the leadership team, and when effective teachers are in front of students working every day and have the support for professional learning, that we see the student outcomes here. So at this time, I want to turn the presentation over to Dr. Dina Hill, who will give you an update on the Early Intervention Academy.
Okay. Well, at the same time that we were creating the Early Literacy Center, we also developed the Early Intervention Academy. And if you remember, this is the first application-based special education academy. And just a reminder, last year when we started with 3-year-olds. We had 4 classrooms of 3-year-olds. And in those classrooms, we have 8 students with disabilities and 2 non-disabled peers. The overall goal of the Early Intervention Academy is for our students to be there for their, while their 3-year-old, then through their 4-year-olds, and then leave. Maybe some will stay and need that support when they're 5, but ultimately to leave and go through this really heavily focused intervention academy and then go back to their home campus and be fully included in kindergarten. And so just a reminder of the components. We obviously focus on academics for our 3-year-olds and our 4-year-olds for this year, but we also add and integrate our different therapies into the classroom. So we think about our music therapy, occupational therapy, and speech, and we bring all of that into the classroom, and it's part of the day, as opposed to your traditional services where you might get 30 minutes once 3 weeks. We also have applied behavior analysis, and so we have board-certified behavior analysis professionals that really work on focusing on behavior, and that's particularly effective for students with developmental delays that need more specific ways to be taught how to respond, and especially if they have problems with communication. We also have extended year at the Early Intervention Academy, so the students attend 199 days as opposed to 175, just as part of the program. And then I talked about the non-disabled role models, and we also do explicit social skill instruction. So let me see. I don't want to push the wrong one. Here we go. Okay. Okay, we brought you there's some additional data that's in your packet, but this is really what's exciting for our 3-year-olds, and so this is looking at our 3-year-olds last year. So when you have 3-year-olds with developmental delays, you're looking at, we really want them to learn some ready-to-learn skills so that they can just participate and be part of the educational environment, which is difficult if you have a disability. And so these are the beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of the year data points, and you can see the green with the end of the year. You can see the stair step with each one. But I do want to point out, what we're looking at in that first one, we're looking at cooperation and reinforcement effectiveness, requests. So our students, responding to requests, spontaneous vocalization, because a lot of our kids can't, they don't really talk, and so they have to have a lot of prompting. And then play and leisure, as well as social interaction, and again, the favorite by most of our parents is toileting. If you can get your 3-year-old or 4-year-old toileting before they leave the EIA, I think most of our parents will be extremely happy. So one of the things that as we look at expanding the ELC, which we were just talking about, all the great work that we're doing there, and we expand the EIA because we have 8 classrooms this year, and we need to add a couple additional classes on next year. What we're looking at is needing to move the EIA to a more, to another campus so that we can, completely grow. So we'll be talking throughout the next couple of months and looking for a location that's more centralized and that'll support the students, because we have students throughout the whole district that are attending the EIA, not just from that location. Okay, all right, Carmela, your turn.
Good evening. I'd like to talk a little bit about our journey in implementing FullDay PreK, and I am going to actually point you to the very top of the slide, which indicates our trajectory. We found out in June that this was happening, and we didn't panic. Instead, we assembled an amazing group from many different departments of leaders who were courageous and ready for the task and rolled up their sleeves and helped us to implement a strategy for how we would deliver full-day pre-K in less than 10 weeks. That's what we did. And I can tell you it was a very exciting process. There were a lot of ideas, but one of the instrumental pieces was communicating this to our community, that we were actually going to do it. And Veronica Sofer and her team, Amanda Bubella, were amazing in helping us to get the word out so that parents knew that this was going to be a resource that we would be providing in Fort Bend. And we were all very excited about it. Following that communication, we then had to figure out how to find all of the teachers that we would need in the summer to fully staff our full-day pre-K. And so we held a job fair and invited people from various and sundry places, and we actually had a wonderful experience and were able to staff most of our classrooms for the fall semester with teachers and also paraprofessionals to achieve the 11-to-1 ratio that we set as our goal for our pre-K expansion. So we were very excited about that. Following the staffing, we then coordinated how to equip all of the classrooms, have all of the instructional resources, furniture, and pieces that would be needed, as well as the professional development for all of our new hires so that they could be ready to receive our students in August. And it was an amazing task. It was a lot of fun, Dr. Dupree. Thank you so much for that and for giving me the opportunity to lead it. And I can tell you that we then moved on to having a wonderful program that required us to add an additional 5 sites because of the overwhelming response from the community. We were projected at one point to welcome over 2,700 students. Presently, we have 1,856, but we can certainly be confident that we will have more next year because we're already having the phone calls and the questions around, are you gonna offer full-day pre-K again next year? So I know that they're coming. The next part was actually making sure that those additional classrooms were also fully equipped and those teachers had everything that they needed to welcome our students on board and ready to be successful with their very first opportunity in our educational system. We provided job-embedded professional development. We made sure that they were fully equipped with everything that they needed to be successful. And we were very pleased that our principals fully embraced the process of having late hires, of having parents showing up every day to register, and we got them all in. So I think that's a wonderful success, and applause to everybody who participated in that process. The bottom part of the slide includes our enrollment data, just so you can see the 3-year trend. We actually began with 1,200 half-day students and 187 full-day students at Hunters Glen and at the Ridgemont Early Childhood Center at that time. And in 2018, we transitioned to 1,282 students half-day throughout the district, along with 238 full-day students at Hunters Glen and the now ELC. And this year, we have no half-day students. Everyone goes full-day. And we have a total of 800, that number's not correct, 856 students fully enrolled in full-day pre-K. So we're very excited to have them. We thank you for believing in us and for believing that we could get this done. And we look forward to what the coming year is going to bring and to having an even more successful full-day program in the coming year. And I'll hand it back to Stephanie.
Thank you, Carmela. So far in the presentation, we've talked about what we as a district do once students come to us. This part of the presentation transitions to how we want to support our parents and our families before students enter Fort Bend ISD. So this summer we launched the Fort Bend Read strategy focused on literacy at home. The goal is to engage parents and students in meaningful literacy activities through a partnership with the community. The first phase of Fort Bend Reads is the Good Night Fort Bend video series, which models bedtime stories with students. And we have our leaders right now who are reading to our students once a week. We post a video. We'll be expanding the opportunity to read to community members very soon through our Teaching and Learning website. And I'm excited to say we've already been contacted by an author who has convinced their publisher to give rights so that they can read their own book on the Good Night Fort Bend series. The real focus of Fort Bend Reads is to make sure that before students come to us, parents have resources and tools in order to engage their students in literacy. That means they need access to libraries and reading materials. So this summer, we piloted at 2 campuses, the Early Literacy Center and Walker Station Elementary, which has a high population of English language learners, open access to libraries in the summer. We had 189 students at the ELC that participated in summer enrichment, and at the 4 events at the Walker Station Library, we had 20 to 30 families each time. So this is something that we want to expand next summer to offer across Fort Bend ISD. We had great feedback from the pilot. And really the next steps in 1920 are developing family support tools and engaging community partners where our team can teach those partners how to work with parents so that they can engage students in literacy in the home. So we'll close our presentation showing you kind of the cornerstones of what we've been working on and talking about how we'll continue. Across Fort Bend ISD, we will continue to support job-embedded learning for teachers around the implementation of the balanced literacy model. We'll track our data and focus on the intervention fidelity related to literacy intervention. With respect to pre-K, we'll be expanding the Ridgemont Early Literacy Center using the cohort model that was developed. We're excited to announce that we've received a TEA planning grant for the launch of a second ELC, and Carmela and team will be working on that location and the launch for next school year. Related to the EIA, as Dina said, we'll add 2 classes, and most importantly, our 4-year-olds. We hope to transition most of those to a kindergarten classroom with inclusive support. That was the goal from the start. And then with respect to community partnerships, we want to make sure that we have the tools to support parents with early literacy, and we want to begin to improve our partnerships around access to pre-K services. So at this time, our team is ready for questions.
Wow. I want to start by thanking each and every one of you and your teams for all of your hard work. There is lots of wonderful, wonderful information in the presentation we just heard, and we can't thank you enough as a board. We'll get started with Mrs. Tossan.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. So I was going to open up by applauding you guys. And I think we did that last year because behind every number is a child. Behind every number that you presented tonight is a child. And we've sat here before around this table and been very concerned about kids that are slipping through the cracks. And you guys are now implementing the vision that we've talked about here, and you're doing an exceptional job. And so my hat's off to you. I've been there and visited a few times, and it is remarkable to watch the work that is going on, to watch the students learning and thriving, and we all know that literacy is the foundation to learning. And if our kids can't read, then we've failed. And so you guys are really doing it and making it happen every day. And I just can't express to you enough how much I appreciate, and I know the board appreciates all the work that you're doing. I have a couple of questions, just mostly for clarification. On slide 6, I know that you said our blue bars are our DRA, which was very subjective. And I think you said our orange and green bars are our RIN 360. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so, I was just thinking about this and wondering, having a subjective reading test could have been why it was masking some of our students who were struggling. And now that we have a more objective test, we can really target those interventions. You think that would be an accurate statement?
That's a very accurate statement. I would add to that the DRA does provide individual classroom teachers an additional data point, but should not be the sole data point as we were relying on it.
Right, and so having a child with a disability, I will say I had to really do my homework for the last 19 years to ensure that she was getting, a research-based reading program and interventions. So I'm very glad to see this because I think it really helps us see which of our students are struggling, and is, of course, going to help you guys and other teachers across the district as we try to identify kids who need those interventions. So I was supportive of this, for that reason, because I watched with my own child, and it appears that you guys have really been implementing well. I appreciate your candidness about where we've had some challenges, and in the fidelity, I read all the materials that you guys provided, and ensuring that we implement with fidelity. And I think I can say that we completely support that. We want to make sure that this is being implemented with fidelity across the district, to ensure that, all kids have access, and they have access, in an appropriate way. On the next slide with the blue bars, so you said that kinder is getting the LLI only in the first semester, not in the entire year. Explain that.
Only for half a semester.
Okay.
The LLI begins at what's called a reading level A, so it requires some skill development, and that normally is acquired around January. So we have a good read with the MOY screener and are able to determine which students truly need intervention.
Okay.
Because of the varying rates that kids come into kindergarten, we start with the teacher as the mode of intervention.
Okay. Okay, so they're coming in, and the teacher is giving interventions. We're doing a middle of the year check, and then identifying the kids that need the interventions with LLI, and then that's why, and they're only getting it that half a year, or that, I guess, maybe not even the whole semester.
Depending on how they progress.
Okay, which is why we may see our kinder students not reaching that probable reader growth at the end of the year.
Well, we're going to have more data in a couple of years, because we just started tracking it at probable reader. That's why I wanted to change the data metrics, so that you
Okay.
could see how they relate to their grade level peers after the intervention.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. That's helpful. On slide 10, we have 72 students in our Early Intervention Academy. How many spots do we have? Remind me.
We have eight slots open. 4, we already have students that have already been identified, applied. We just have to have ARDs to bring them in, and those are
great.
4 students with disabilities. And so that leaves us with 4 openings for non-disabled students at the 4-year-old level. And that's a little bit different, because in that area, most kids do qualify for pre-K and are going into the regular pre-K program.
Okay. Okay, that's fantastic, though, because that's a lot of growth. I mean, we really are filling up those spots, and so that's really exciting. I think as more parents and community members learn more about the program, I think we're going to maybe end up with a waiting list at some point.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think we have a waiting list now for 3-year-olds.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like maybe we need to expand.
Maybe. We would love to do that.
So that's fantastic. I also going to, I don't have a number on this page, but your Early Intervention Academy slide, a lot of people don't understand the importance of these skills for a student with a disability. We sometimes as parents take for granted with typical kids that your child is potty trained in the 2-year-old range, or maybe 3-year-old, but it can be a whole lot harder for a child with a disability. And historically, that has created a barrier for students to be included in the regular education classroom. So I just wanted to state here, because not everyone understands the importance of that in breaking down the barriers for these students to be included in the regular classroom. All of these other things are important as well, but I think a lot of people would be surprised how kids get turned away simply because they're not fully potty trained at the kindergarten level. So kudos to you guys for, that's a lot of growth, and knowing kind of what the numbers are already in my head, it's just really fantastic. I don't have anything else, but just thank you all for your hard work and for making a difference in these kids' lives.
Thank you, Mrs. Tossin. Mrs. Helliger?
A wonderful presentation, and the young lady over the Learning Center, I mean, when you started talking and speaking and beaming, I was beaming with you. And then when you got to the numbers, I said, now I know why she's beaming so much. So again, thank you all for all the work that you did and for making this happen and for showing such great progress. You know, I like to be leading, you know, and so we're leading in this area, so this is wonderful. And I had just leaned over to Dr. Dupree and said, you know, I would love to read, and I'm sure the rest of our board members would love to read in our Silent Night series. I believe it's called Silent Night. Yeah. Good night. Good night. Good night. Okay. Good night. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So I do have one question because I think Ms. Tassan covered a lot, but when looking at the identifying the interventions that are needed, what's the age or what's the process of identifying someone that's just not normal interventions but would need special interventions at the ELC?
Well, so when we, just like we talked about, let's just say, for example, looking at those kindergartners, right, that came in, if we start to see that they're not responding after a while, especially with something like the LLI intervention, then we have to ask ourselves, do they need a more specialized type of methodology? And so that's when we look at perhaps a referral for special education. Sometimes we consider, do we need to look at additional protections such as 504? And so we do have other, specifically with reading, we have other reading intervention programs for kids that need more than LLI can offer. Is that what you're?
That's what I was getting at. I'm not sure what LLI stands for, but it could be some type of intervention. I'm not sure what the acronym stands for.
Right.
Your literacy, okay. And I guess the time frame, what's the time frame that we look at that? And I'm gonna tell you why. And this is before all of you guys, so when I tell this story, it has nothing to do with you guys. But I know when my youngest son came to the district, my eldest son came to the district, it took us quite some time and a lot of time for me advocating for him in order for us to figure out that he needed some special interventions and services, and he ended up being dyslexic. So I don't know how that, plays into the services that you provide those kids.
It's a great question because I say back in the old days, but it wasn't too long ago, we heard things like you have to wait till third grade to see if they're failing before you refer them for that kind of support. Now what we know and what the research says is that, for example, those kindergarten students, assuming they this isn't their first time ever being exposed to literacy, if they're coming from a different country or they've never ever been in school before, we might need to wait a little bit. But assuming they've been in a pre-K program, they've been exposed to some literacy at home, and they come in at kindergarten level and they're not responding at that mid-year, and we start using LLI, if we don't start seeing some improvement, by the end of kindergarten, we should be looking at a referral for special education or under 504 for dyslexia. And I'm speaking specifically to a learning disability or dyslexia. That's a little bit different if it's something like autism or an intellectual disability that we would not, that we would go immediately. So and then once we make that referral, then we have 45 instructional days to get that completed, and then we have the ARD meeting. So we're looking at hopefully getting those services much earlier than we have before, and actually I believe it's next month we'll be presenting, within the next couple of months, we'll be presenting a thorough report to the board on special education, and we'll be able to talk to you about the numbers that we've increased specifically for learning disability, which will speak to that, I think.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. We appreciate that. When we used to use the DRAs, that used to take a lot of time for the teachers, right? And so there was a lot of instructional time lost because it was in one-on-one.
Yes,
right?
sir.
And so with the REN 360, I assume that we've maybe eliminated a lot of that.
Yes, Renaissance 360 takes approximately 20 minutes for a student to take it, and with the classroom toolkit, where we have 12 tools, or 10 or 12 tools in a classroom, half the class could take it while the other class is working on something else, or sometimes teachers will fill one classroom, do all of their students, and then transition.
Okay, so I would assume that we've made things a little easier for our teachers as well, and getting better results, hopefully.
Yes, sir.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Mrs. James?
All right, thank you very much. Great presentation, and it's very exciting. I want to echo many of the things that my colleagues have said, just because we're so excited to see this progress, and I think this is, going to solve other problems. As we talk about expansion and we talk about closing achievement gap and we talk about these kinds of things, I think this is going to be a key piece in making that work possible. So I can hardly wait to just show everybody in the state all the great things we're doing. I also want to say specifically, because I didn't hear it said, but 1,856 pre-K, full-day pre-K students, that's awesome. And that is another factor that's going to help us in addressing the needs of our most needy students. So I really appreciate that, and I thank you for working all summer and missing out on your family vacations. And I'm looking at one person, but I know that there's a whole team of people involved in that, so I appreciate all of you guys for doing that. I did have a question about the graphs on pages, I think it's 7 and 6. I'm struggling with what the difference between these two graphs is, because they seem to be labeled very close to the same. Percentage of students participating and meeting minimum student growth. Students participating in the program and meeting end of year reading expectations. I'm struggling.
So this graph details the percentage of students meeting end-of-year reading expectations, which ties specifically to skills on reading. So things like comprehension, fluency, reading skills. The next graph gives us a picture of the rate of growth, if you think of it like that. So when we want every child to grow a year. This tells us the percent of students that are hitting that mark across the district.
Okay, and those are the percentages you were comparing. Those percentages are what you were comparing to the across the district type numbers. Is that true?
Well, this particular data, Ms. James, is related to those students receiving leveled literacy intervention. So our most at-risk students,
right.
This is the percent that met a year's growth. When we were discussing the ELC as compared, that was to all students in the district. So those who are not needing a Tier 3 intervention and those who are, everyone.
Okay, and then on the previous slide, those are also students who are in the LLI program or the Tier 3, receiving the Tier 3 intervention.
Yes, ma'am.
And those are meeting the grade level expectations. So if we had whatever percentage it was of those students, a high percentage, I'm sure, going into that to receive that intervention, and then those are actually meeting grade level standard.
After the end of the intervention, yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I think I got it now.
All right. Thank you all very much once again for the presentation. It was a great evening. It's a lot of hard work, so thank you once again. Trustees, before we go into closed session, if we could get back to eat, and so we can eat and get back out and continue with our meeting this evening. With that being said, we're going to be down this hall on the left. So we will now convene in closed session under the Texas Open Meeting Act, Chapter 551, and those sections listed in the agenda, and for the purpose of private consultation with the board's attorney on any or all subject matters authorized by law. We are now convening in closed session.